Content warning. Check the show notes for more information. It's July 20th, 1944, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Ariel, Rebecca, and Ali, the Retrospectors.
A popular philosophical thought experiment asks whether you would go back in time and try to kill Hitler. Well, today in history in 1944, a German colonel named Claus von Stauffenberg required neither a time machine nor any wrestling with his conscience when he set off a bomb in an almost successful attempt to assassinate the Führer.
And a less popular time travel thought experiment would be, would you go back in time and save Hitler? And somebody else in the room was inadvertently getting to live that out in real time as well. Say, Lieutenant Colonel called Heinz Brandt, who at the time was serving as an aide to General Adolf Heusinger, a member of the Army's General Staff. This actually wasn't the first time that Brandt had unwittingly been involved in a plot to assassinate Hitler, because by total coincidence, the year before, he had been asked to load a box of Cointreau onto the Führer's plane. The box actually contained a bomb, but it failed to detonate. But anyway, on this day, Brandt was standing beside General Heusinger, his boss, who was standing next to Hitler, and they were poring over a map, and Brandt wanted to take a closer look at the map, but here was this pesky suitcase right in the way, so he picked it up and moved it to the other side of the solid oak table support.
So that when the bomb went off that was inside the suitcase, Hitler was largely shielded from the impact. I say largely because he did actually suffer some physical repercussions, burst eardrums. He himself described his rear end as like a baboon's arse afterwards. And the explosion was severe enough. There were two bombs and only one went off, but the explosion was still severe enough that Stauffenberg, who wasn't in the room, otherwise he'd have been impacted, he had assumed that the Führer had been killed by it. And he went off, was the second part of the plan, to go and begin his putsch in Berlin and create a new Germany. I'm choosing my words carefully because the thing is, right, all these guys are Nazis, okay? I mean, it's quite important, I think, to say this. The reason that Stauffenberg was allowed in the room with Hitler with a bomb was because he was a Nazi. He was a senior Nazi. He was a career officer. He was a colonel. He was pictured with Hitler just a few days before. And it was only recently that he'd been recruited to try and assassinate Hitler. And he was sympathetic to that, but not because he thought necessarily that the Nazis had completely the wrong direction or, you know, some ethical concerns about what was happening to the Jews in concentration camps. It wasn't any of that. It was because they're gonna lose. And he feared that impending defeat, which of course was just around the corner. We're in 1944.
Yeah, the Wehrmacht was retreating on both fronts. The Allies had landed in Normandy just 6 weeks earlier, and the Soviet Red Army was pushing inexorably westward. But a handful of high-ranking German officers had begun to believe that Hitler was dragging Germany into destruction, yes, but also dishonor. I mean, it's weird again that this should be rearing its head at this particular stage.
It's the "Are we the bad guys" sketch, isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
you're
right.
Literally, you're in a bunker called the Wolf Slayer. I mean, I think you know, if you call your hideout the Wolf Slayer, you should know you're the bad guys earlier than this.
Totally. Anyways, Stauffenberg was this charismatic, aristocratic, as we say, officer who had once supported National Socialism, but had begun to turn against what he witnessed as the regime's brutality. I mean, again, you know, how much do you stick up for before you take your moral stand? He had already stood for quite a lot. But anyway, he'd been blinded in one eye and lost his right hand and two fingers on his left from Allied bombings in North Africa. But actually it was his injuries that prevented him from being able to arm both of the bombs he was carrying. In the end, he only managed to arm one of the 1 kilogram charges, and the second one he just fumbled and wasn't able to do in the time he had before he was set to put the suitcase down next to the Führer and get himself out of the room in time to avoid the blast.
Yeah, I mean, the man only had like 3 fingers. He's not the guy that you pick to... He had to arm the bomb with like a pair of pliers, and of course he's sweating doing this. He's just arrived at the Wolf's Lair, which was located in sort of remote woodland in what's now Poland, but at the time was East Prussia. It was guarded by 2 units of SS troops. The location was top secret. It had all these underground bunkers, you know, a very highly militarized, very highly controlled environment. So he arrives there there with the bombs. He's like, oh, I'm hot. I'm just going to go and wash up and change my shirt. So he's arming these bombs with his 3 fingers. Of course, it was going to be difficult. And if it sounds like this is a weird thing for him to be personally doing, it was. It wasn't supposed to be him originally. For one thing, the coup plan, what's called Operation Valkyrie, a lot of times people use it to refer to the assassination plot, but Operation Valkyrie was actually a pre-existing protocol for what the Nazi regime would do if society were to collapse in some way and they needed to restore order. And the way they were going to do that was through this thing called the Reserve Army, which was sort of the part of the army that handled all the administration side. But they were trained soldiers and they were stationed all over the country. So the idea is that they would then be able to sort of rise up and put down any popular revolt. And Stauffenberg was actually the chief of staff of the Reserve Army. So he's the last person that should actually be involved in the assassination plot itself. Originally, it was supposed to be General Helmut Steiff, who was the only other member of the conspiracy who had regular personal access to Hitler that was supposed to do it. But he chickened out. So Stauffenberg found himself in this situation where he not only had to plant the bomb, but then like a Looney Tunes character, he had to kind of scuttle as quickly as possible back to Berlin to enact stage 2 of the plot.
But he's an unlikely assassin, and that's why it played in his favour. I mean, it's sort of perfect, isn't it? It was so nearly right. They didn't search him at the security points, A, because he was known to them and he was a regular visitor, but B, because he's like a disabled guy with his briefcase full of notes. He's not the guy who's carrying a gun who's going to try and kill the Führer. And he would have gotten away with it, except for the fact that suitcase got moved at the last minute. But as you're saying, he didn't know that. And in fact, there were simultaneous putsches happening in Paris and in Prague. And the news of this assassination having been successful, which Stauffenberg gave to his associates on the phone, triggered the simultaneous events in those cities as well. And in Paris, hundreds of SS officers were arrested and locked up and believed that Hitler had been assassinated. And then he pops up on the radio that evening, swearing vengeance against those that have tried to kill him.
Yeah, and not just swearing it, but actually carrying it out. His response was swift and incredibly merciless.
Doesn't sound like him.
My notes say newly paranoid, but again, you're not paranoid if they're all out to get you. And Hitler launched this massive purge. More than 7,000 people were arrested. Approximately 5,000 were executed. Many of them were hanged on meat hooks with piano wire, and their executions were filmed for Hitler's personal viewing benefit. Prominent figures included the likes of General Ludwig Beck and Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who was forced to kill himself by suicide after being implicated, although his exact role remains a bit uncertain. But even families of conspirators were punished under the concept of Sippenhaft, which is kin liability. So you had wives being imprisoned and children sent to orphanages under false names. And the Gestapo called it a warning, basically. No one, not even the aristocracy or decorated war heroes, could cross Hitler and live.
Yeah, I mean, actually, Stauffenberg was one of the first to go, because he had gone to the Reserve Army headquarters to start orchestrating this coup. And the commander-in-chief of the Reserve Army was a guy called Friedrich Fromm. He was ambivalent on the coup. He knew that it was in the works and he didn't tell anyone, but he also didn't really want to play any part in it. So in the coup version of Operation Valkyrie, the Reserve Army would be told Hitler had been killed by the SS as part of an internal coup by Nazi officials, thus then positioning the Reserve Army as the restorers of order in the Nazi regime. But as it became clear that Hitler had not died and that the tide was turning against the coup, Friedrich Fromm then started desperately trying to make it clear that he had never been involved in this coup. He's only just hearing about this now. The first thing he did was first order Stauffenberg and the other conspirators arrested. Stauffenberg was wounded in the shootout, but then he held sort of an immediate court-martial and ordered several of them to be executed basically on the spot. Stauffenberg was the third of them to be shot in the courtyard of the Reserve Army HQ. His last words were, "Long live sacred Germany." And Fromm's actions were not enough to save his own life too. Afterwards, he was seen as having ordered those executions precisely to eliminate any witnesses who might be able to link him to the plot. And he was also executed in the subsequent purge as well. And Stauffenberg's brother, Berthold, was another member of the conspiracy. His death was especially gruesome. He was sentenced to be hanged, but the way they actually did it was that he was just strangled and revived and strangled and revived over and over again. And like those other executions, it was all being filmed for Hitler to enjoy later.
Those Nazis, man, you know, they're they're kind of monsters, aren't they?
The more episodes we do.
Yeah. And so, to return to your original question, would you go back in time and kill Hitler? Like, honestly, it sounds like a glib statement, but honestly, I think the right thing to do would be go back further in time, when he's a child, and give him a hug. That's probably the best thing to do, isn't it? Because that's the only thing that would change the direction of history.
This is like the David Cameron thing again. Hug a Hitler.
Yeah.
Now,
This episode first aired last year exclusively to members of Club Retrospectors.
Join today and unlock a new episode this Sunday.
Patreon.com/retrospectors